I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and my guest for this episode is Jeremy Streten, a successful entrepreneur and lawyer at Streten Mason Lawyers. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Jeremy has been featured on television many times, having experience in the areas of property law, conveyancing, retail and commercial leases, wills, probate and estate planning, litigation and dispute resolution, debt recovery, building and construction law, commercial and corporate law, including liquor licensing, corporate restructuring, recovery and insolvency. Jeremy's passion is to help entrepreneurs and small to medium-sized business owners succeed in their business so they can live the life they want to live. He is the author of the Business Legal Lifecycle, which is a guidebook designed to help business owners understand what they are doing in their businesses from a legal perspective and provides them with a plan for the future. During our chat, we covered a lot, including why and when you should engage a lawyer, the type of documentation you should have in your business and when it's required. We covered the 13 steps of the Business Legal Lifecycle. And if you refer to the show notes for this episode, you'll find a link to the Business Legal Lifecycle infographic, which details the phases. So if you're a visual person, you'll want to check that out. We also discussed when to expect dips in business growth and the actions required to move through those slower periods and back to a growth phase. Some of the common areas business owners go wrong in the area of law. Jeremy's thoughts on exiting a business and why everyone needs a plan for that stage of both their business and life, and of course, much more. To connect with Jeremy or to buy his book, head to businesslegallifecycle.com.au. And to get the Trench Talk bonuses and gifts Jeremy mentions towards the end of the episode, head to businesslegallifecycle.com.au/trench. If you enjoyed Trench Talk, head to xrm.com.au/podcast and opt in for the newsletter. We'll make sure you're notified when every new episode of the show is released. And if you're feeling super nice, please make sure you subscribe and leave a review wherever possible for Trench Talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Enjoy my chat with Jeremy Streten. Jeremy, thanks for doing this.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm in my home office this morning, and for listener context, where are you situated?
I'm actually in my home office as well. Good synergy there. I work from home on Tuesday, so yeah.
Up in Brisbane, have I got that right?
In Brisbane, yeah. In beautiful Brisbane, although it's not the nicest day today, but yeah, the weather up here is pretty good.
No, it is indeed. Now, I thought we might start with, on our work from home day, you're a lawyer, obviously. You've written a book, The Business Legal Lifecycle.
Yep.
I thought we might start with how you've navigated. Obviously, there's differences in jurisdictions, right, with law, and then how you can actually write a book that applies really everywhere. And we can talk about the expansion of your book maybe later on. But is law in Brisbane the same as in Melbourne? Is it the same as in New York, London? How does that fit? How have you navigated that issue with law, I guess?
It's such a great question, and it's something that that a lot of people, I think it's a bit of a limiting belief that it can't be across the different places. And really what it comes down to is that my book is about concepts. So it's not about what the actual law says. It's on a conceptual basis about what you should do and why you should do it. And I do get this question a lot. So it's one of those things that when you go to the conceptual level, the law is very similar across Australia. It's very similar across a lot of the Western world. In fact, a lot of the world in general. The concepts of what we do is very much the same legally. It's the implementation and how it's actually delivered on a day-to-day basis that's different. So my book is kept at a deliberately very high level so that it explains the concepts. And the other reason for that, Matt, and I was very deliberate with that, is that I wanted to make it a book that anyone can read. if I got into the minutiae of what laws say and what their actual effect is, what I find is people's eyes glaze over. Law is one of those things that people don't really want to have to learn about too much. And what the book does is it talks about the high level so that people can actually understand the concepts behind the law, not necessarily what they actually have to do on a day-to-day basis, and that way make it available to more people.
So because it's very difficult for a lot of business owners to understand law in minute detail, how do we go about finding a lawyer, first of all, and when should we go about that?
Yeah, well, I think a lawyer is one of the 2 or 3 trusted advisors that you should have from the beginning of your business. Everyone needs a bookkeeper, an accountant, and a lawyer. And the reason for that is to find someone that you can work with and who will provide you with proactive advice to actually help you to build your business. All too often, lawyers are reactive and we're just there to solve problems. But what I've found is that doesn't work because there's so many things that we can actually solve for business owners early on. So to answer your question, what you're looking for is a lawyer who's proactive, who's actually out there to help you to fix problems before they arise, not someone there just as a stopgap measure to solve problems when they occur.
So really what you're saying from the very start of your business, you should have a lawyer to sound ideas, check things against, run things past. And I guess that the first question would come up for a lot of business owners, certainly, is the cost of doing that?
Yep.
So how do you think about the cost?
Well, I think that's a great point. And the cost can be an impediment. And that's about really getting the right things that you need to start the business. So a lawyer will provide you with advice about protecting yourself from a legal perspective. That's their job. Whether or not you do everything they say is another thing. You don't have to take every single bit of advice that they give you. You've got to figure out what is actually financially viable for you in your business. So, for instance, one of the more controversial parts of my book is about intellectual property and trademark protection. If you go to a lawyer, your traditional lawyer, and you ask, well, what do I need to do straight away? They will talk about trademarking your logo and your business name straight away. That's great lawyer advice, but it's not very good as a practical advice for a business owner. And trademark and protecting a trademark actually comes into phase 5 of the business legal lifecycle, which is protecting intellectual property. And the reason for that is to make sure that you're not spending money on a trademark when you're just starting out a business, because businesses change, names change, what you're doing changes so often these days that there's no point in going and registering a trademark until you actually have a business. So phase 3 is about having initial clients and having clients actually buying your product. Phase 4 is actually having employees that actually are in there operating your business. So once you've got those things in place, then you look at protecting IP. So the answer is to do the minimum stuff that you need to do to get your business started, and then have a plan in place to put those in, put other legal steps in place as you hit certain milestones in business, because it can be expensive. And I'm all about reducing that cost, especially for startup business owners.
I wanted to talk through the business legal life cycle that is it 13? What have I got, 13 steps here?
13 phases.
13 phases? Yeah. Okay. But before we get to that, when did the idea for the book first come to you?
So I've been in business. We're doing this in 2019. I started my business 8 years ago, and about a year in, I recognised that I needed to get a business coach. And he said to me for years, "You've got to write a book. You've got to write a book." And I had no idea what that book would look like. And then probably about 2013, 2014, I had a couple of matters that happened with some clients that were really a shot in the arm for me I needed to do something. And they were clients where, for exactly what your question before about, they didn't want to go and get legal advice because of the cost, that they didn't go and get legal advice. And if they had just spoken to a lawyer early on, they would have been able to solve their problems. One invested $1 million of other people's money in a property development where they weren't aligned between the two business partners.
Oh, wow.
And so they lost over $1 million. And another one was a business franchisor who, if he'd just gone and got some legal advice, he could have stopped so many problems that had happened in his business. But he didn't want to do that. Neither of them wanted to do that because of the cost. And so in my frustration, I thought, well, how can I change the model? How can I flip being a lawyer from being reactive to people's problems? And how can I be proactive? And I sat down, I'd done a retreat with my coach about life cycles of businesses. And so it was fresh in my mind. And I sat down and I drew out a life cycle. And I sat there and I went, okay, so what steps do we need to do in business? And I thought about the clients that I'd done things properly with and who'd been really successful and ones who hadn't. And I mapped out when they did things. As I normally do, I take it through to as crazy an idea as I can get, and I drew up a life cycle and ran it past a couple of people. My partner in the law firm got his view on it. We tweaked it a little bit, and then we came up with the 13 phases. So it was really a frustration from me about how do we become more proactive as lawyers because of two really bad situations that clients got themselves in that could have been stopped if they just spoken to us first. So that's how it came about. And then when I had the 13 phases, I went, oh, wow, there's a book in that. And so I sat down and I just had my daughter at the time. And so I was getting up very early in the morning to help do the feedings. And, from 4 a.m. till 6 a.m., I just wrote. And And in 4 months, the book was in a first draft stage. And I was like, wow, here it is. Here's the book that I can actually help people to solve their problems before they arise from a legal perspective.
So the book's actually come out of your practical experience of dealing with businesses, and then I suppose run in line with the law that you practice on and understand and know, and that's where you've come up with this.
Absolutely.
This process or these phases.
That's right.
So the conception phase, which is phase number 1, can we talk a little bit about each one of these? And we're going to go through basically a journey of a business, right? So phase 1, conception.
Yeah, so this one is it's probably the simplest of all the phases, but it's probably the one that most people get wrong. And that's because conception's about, well, when you've got the idea, what do you need to do to think about to start the business off correctly? So it's about thinking about your goals, thinking about where you're going. And, there's that great story about the space shuttle that, on its way to the moon, it was on course, I think it was 3% of the time. But because they knew where they were going, they were always able to course correct to know where they're going. So, the conception phase is all about setting those goals up and knowing where you're going for your business, recognizing that it might change. It might change in the future. But if you don't have the goals, then you have no idea how you're going to get there. So that's what the conception phase is all about.
And why does a lawyer need to be involved in that stage? Are you saying that they do or they don't? Because this is when we're talking about, back of a serviette, back of an envelope sort of stuff, maybe an old notebook, throwing ideas around. Do you need to spend money on a lawyer, in your opinion, that early in the process?
No.
You don't? Okay.
No, I don't believe you do. I think that you need to think about these things because when you go to your lawyer for phase 2, which we'll talk about in a minute, you need to have the answers to these questions because what the answers to those questions about where you're going and what your plan is very much dictates what the advice is going to be in the coming phases.
And choosing a name you've got in the first stage as well. So why is that important to know early on?
I think just so that you're not thinking about it all the time. I think that
get it done.
Get it done because often that doesn't matter.
Yep.
Often, depending on the type of business, it's often about the person behind the business, and so it's more about just getting that done and getting that out of the way. Because if you don't do that, then a lot of people spend a lot of time obsessing over names, and really it doesn't matter too much. It's about the business behind the name. So I want to get that out of the way early on, and phase 1 is the best time to do that.
And then we move on to phase 2, which of course is the startup here. What does that involve?
So that is the biggest phase of the life cycle. So this is about setting up the right entities. And that's where coming to a lawyer with what you're actually wanting to achieve is really crucial. And I'll give you a quick example here. Probably the big difference here is, are you looking to build a business that you're going to own and operate for the next 40 years? Or are you going to build a business that's going to be in operation for the next 3 or 5 and you want to sell it? There's very different structures that have to be in place depending on what your long-term goal is for the business. So that's why you need to think about your goals early on, and also why you need to think of the name, because when you're setting up a company, if you're setting up a private company, then you need to have a name for that and you need to make sure that it's unique. So companies are really important. Thinking about where are you going to operate the business from? So leasing, if you're going to operate from home, fine, you don't need a lease in place. But if you're going to go and lease premises to operate your business from, you need to think about that in phase 2. What are the terms of that lease? What are the commercial negotiations that you're going to have in relation to that lease? Things like insurance need to be in place. Every business needs insurance. You need some level of public liability insurance. You need to have some sort of, depending on the business, you need to have some sort of business risk insurance, professional indemnity insurance. In all manner of different things, you need those kind of insurances. They're the 3 big ticket items that I always say that startup businesses need to get right.
And surely you need to talk through a few of these things, right? Because very easy to work out the exact structure as an example if you can predict exactly the future, but none of us can 100% do that, right? So I guess it's also a process of getting into probably the best position where you've got the best understanding of where things are most likely to happen. Would that be a fair call?
That's a fair call, and that's where having the discussions with your lawyer and your accountant and your bookkeeper, are very important early on, especially the lawyer and the accountant, because one's looking from a tax perspective, one's looking from a legal perspective, and those goals might change. But if you have those initial discussions, you can understand why you set things up. The amount of people that come to me, Matt, who they've been in business 10 years and they have no idea why they set their structure up the way they did 10 years ago is frightening. And if they just have those initial discussions, then they should have a better understanding of that. I understand some people may not get it even with those discussions. And I know that legalese it can be very confusing. It's better to have those discussions now than not have them and try and have them in 10 years' time.
And have you got an example of where if you get it wrong, it can really cost you? Something you've come across maybe in your time?
Yeah, I've got hundreds of them. And the main one is really around that, not knowing where you're going. So, if you're a business owner and you want to sell in a couple of years' time, and actually I'll use an example out of the States, out of the US, because I'm going over there. And an Australian guy actually started up a business over there in one certain type of structure. He didn't get any advice out of it. He just read some stuff online and started that business. The issue was that the way that he structured his business meant that he couldn't get the tax benefits of the treaty between the US and Australia because he'd set up in a certain structure. Right. Had he just got some legal and accounting advice, he would have realised that, oh, wait a second, that wouldn't cost him that much. And so what happened is he had to pay a 30% tax rate over there, and then he had to pay tax over here. Now, that's an extreme example of someone expanding over internationally. In Australia, the same can be said for someone who sets up their structure and they don't tell anyone that they want to sell in a couple of years' time. They might be better off in that situation having a trust structure in place to get better capital gains tax benefits than if they're going to hold their business for 20 years. And in that case, they might be better off having it in a company structure for those 20 years because the benefits outweigh keeping it in one structure or the other.
So are you saying that a company structure, if you're holding a business, is a better way of going about things? I mean, I know there's parameters of each individual circumstances and all that sort of stuff, but generally speaking, a company's better if you're going to create and hold a business, whereas a trust structure is often better if you're going to build and sell. Have I understood that correctly?
That's right. And the simple reason behind that, not to get too technical on it, is that in a trust structure, you've got to pay money on everything that you earn every year at the highest marginal tax bracket. But when you sell, you get a 50% capital gains tax discount. And you've got to get individual advice on all this stuff.
Of course, yeah.
That's fine. But that may not work if you want to hold it long term. There might be benefits to you only paying tax on the company tax rate for 20 years that might outweigh the capital gains tax benefit over time. So all these things you need to get advice on for individual circumstances, but they're the basic rules around it.
Initial clients is phase number 3. So this is when we actually go out and start transacting, selling, serving, providing product to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is all, exactly about that. And it's about having the right processes and procedures in place to make sure that if something goes wrong in the future, that you're protected and that you can recover money from the people. So all too often in business, and I've seen this happen countless times, where a business owner will start their business, they'll get a couple of clients on board, they'll be mates, they'll be people they've worked with before, they'll do everything on a handshake, and handshakes are great. And then in 5 years' time, something goes wrong, the relationship sours for whatever reason, there's a misunderstanding, and there's no documentation in place. It becomes very difficult for lawyers to enforce your expectations if there's no documentation in place. And and these things come up, they're insidious, they come up without anyone knowing about it. So what we're very big on with the life cycle is get your agreements in place first. Again, they don't have to be massively complicated things, but get them right in the first place because they'll protect you long term and you never know what might happen. I get it. I've been there. I've started multiple businesses and we're all eager to get in there and sell and sell and sell and sell. If you don't protect yourself, though, then that can cause a lot of issues for you in the future. Another one that's really big at this phase is debt collection. So even if you're being paid up front, you've got to have a procedure in place to recover your debts. All too often, and I see this with businesses, we do a lot of debt collection in our firm, and my business partner in the law firm does a lot of that stuff. And all too often we see that people don't have a process in place. And so they might have massive debts that haven't been recovered, and that has a massive cash strain on the business. having a procedure in place that's actually followed is really critical. And it's something to put in place in phase 3, because it's better to do it early on than when the horse is bolted and you're owed $400,000 later on.
And if you have a process in place, from what I've seen in different businesses that I've worked with, is that half of the game is actually having that process in place, right? Because once you know where you're going and you understand the phases, a lot of the time you don't actually need to go all the way to get the actual outcome that you want, right? So I guess it's sort of a bit of a structure, something to lean on, just so you know where you're going and how to handle this phase, knowing the next phase that's coming.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I would also say that you've got to train your clients and customers to the way that you want to do business. And if you start off doing that poorly, and again, I'll put my hand up and say that, I did that early on in business. Well, if you don't train your customers and clients the right way, then you'll spend a lot of time to retrain them to get the business where you want it to be. So do it early on and set those boundaries and do it right from the beginning, and you'll save yourself a lot of headaches in the future. And that's actually a good point to raise, is that a lot of this stuff, when people put it in place early on, they don't see the benefit of it in the future. All I would say to that is that these problems do come up in every business, and so it's about plugging those gaps. And if you plug them early on, then you won't see the problems, but you'll certainly not have the problems that a lot of business owners face.
And training your clients, I think, is a really good way to look at it, because if you go down which I know you suggest to do, get your terms in place and get things signed off on by your clients, and that can have a negative effect on your growth early on. But, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but if you also combine it with training your clients as well, then you can sort of set up a situation where you don't get yourself in a bad position where people don't pay. So just a very practical way of doing this would be, as a tradesman like myself, we always say that we'll take payment on the completion of the job. We set that expectation up before we actually go out to site. So that's what people are expecting. So you don't have that situation where you drive away, you've solved a problem, the bill comes a week later, then they look at it a week after that, and all of a sudden the thing that was so urgent 2 weeks ago that they're appreciative of is no longer a high priority. And then you just get this spiraling set of circumstances which ends up in you not receiving your money. So again, right from the start, if you put those terms and conditions up front, even if they're not written, that's going to help, I think, put everything in a good position so you don't end up in that spot where you need to deal with lost money and all that sort of stuff. A good idea?
Absolutely. And as I don't know whether you know Keith Cunningham, he's the Rich Dad out of Rich Dad Poor Dad, the famous Robert Kiyosaki book.
I do.
And one of his points is always that you get paid up front, or you get paid when the person actually wants, when they want the work and when they're happy with the work. Because if you leave it, then all manner of things come up later on. And I've seen that time and time again. So yeah, absolutely get paid as quickly as you can. If you can get paid beforehand, great. If you can't, make sure you get paid at the end of the job.
And then we move on to the next phase of bringing on employees, which is where you start to add complication to the business as well as the capacity to expand, I guess you'd say.
Absolutely. And you would have seen and if people check out the Business Legal Lifecycle on the website, businesslegallifecycle.com.au, you'll notice that the phase 4 is the start of a dip. And there's a dip in business. And so bringing on employees is about having the right agreements in place. It's about having, employee handbooks and setting the expectations for those employees so that like customers and clients, you're setting out what you actually expect of them. And so that if they don't know your expectations, then they're not going to comply with them because people can't read minds. So bringing on employees is about that. It's about putting all those chocks in place to bring on the employees, right? And as I say, it is on that little bit of a downward slope in the life cycle. And that's to acknowledge that in business, problems occur. I call it the dip in the book, and the problems occur in business. And often, it may not be bad problems, but there'll be a loss of productivity. There might be a loss in profitability. There might be a loss in something when you bring on employees. However, as you said before, Matt, it is about building those chocks and about putting those things in place to help build yourself for growth in the future. And not every business needs to bring on employees. There's plenty of businesses that I deal with that are sole man and woman bands, and that's fine. And this phase can be skipped entirely if you're not minded to bring on employees. But if you do it right, because it saves you a lot of heartache in the future.
And you've probably seen this a lot too. I've certainly seen it, is that you talk about this dip, which is demonstrated in this kind of curve that you've placed these phases on here. And a very common thing is to bring on employees and then have a bit of a downturn, not understand the evolution of how your business is going to play out long term, and then the most logical thing seems to be to get rid of them and go back to yourself because you don't understand that dip. So very important to have a good understanding of the entire life cycle of a business. So when you get to these phases where you can feel like you're losing a little bit, you know that through another couple of phases and you'll really start to be able to build on that growth, right? Because no company, you're not going to grow a big company without some sort of employees or contractors, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if it's just you, it's a lifestyle business, and if you want any sort of growth or scale, then you need to have employees.
So on the slight downturn in this dip, we've got protecting IP. So let's just talk a small business, a trade business, if you like. Maybe you get a couple of guys or girls on and an apprentice or something like that. Maybe you're a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sort of person operation. I think I've got that right in terms of sizing in that here. Then you've got to work out ways to protect your IP. I suppose first recognise the IP that you actually have and then go about protecting it, right? So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's different types of IP, intellectual property. So you've got the name of your business, the trademark of your business, and really for the types of businesses that we're really talking about, and that's not that important to register the trademark. It's very difficult for someone to steal your name. It's also, we're recording this in 2019. I've been a lawyer for 16 years. 16 years ago, it was really easy to register a trademark because the internet really didn't exist, and now the IP office, quite rightly, will do a Google search on your name, and it's very, very rare that there won't be other businesses with similar names in different states and territories around Australia or around the world. And so it becomes more and more difficult to register a trademark.
Like trying to get a domain name, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's not necessarily, you can do it if you want to, if you think that you have something that you want to protect. It's one of those things you've got to look at the cost. It's a few $1,000s to register a trademark. What's the benefit that you're actually getting out of it? And you need to get some good practical commercial advice from your lawyer. More about protecting intellectual property is more about your intellectual property, about how you operate your business. And so what does that look like? And actually setting up some guides about how you do your business. What's your key intellectual property? Because your name's one thing, as I said before, names really, they identify your business, but they're not, they're a dime a dozen these days. How you operate your business is your true intellectual property. And the life cycle is all about, and we'll get to it, phase 11, which is sale of business. It's all about building you up for sale of business. And this is really a key point of setting up your intellectual property, how you do what you do, how that's unique, and setting it up correctly for a business going forward. So really that's the crux of it. In the book, I talk about patents and other things like that. They're very rare things that the business owners need to do. The crux of protecting intellectual property is protecting your processes and how you do what you do. And one of the other reasons for putting it after you bring on employees, and I've learned this from my own experience, is that it's all well and good for you as a business owner to set up your procedures. And depending on your type of business, that might work. But often they will be set also by your employees, by your team. They'll have a certain way that they want things done, and they can bring a certain different perspective to you. So there's a lot of merit in building out your systems and procedures after you've got your employees so that they can actually help build them for you.
And that becomes the backbone of because we're still in this dip here now, so that becomes the backbone for your growth, right? Because
that's right.
Especially if you start small, you very quickly realise that you get to a point where you can't get to everybody, you can't get to every client, it can't be all about you anymore, and that's obviously where a system comes in place. So the better that you build out your systems through this phase, the quicker and less complicated in a lot of circumstances I would have thought your growth going forward is going to be. Because the next phase here is maximising your current business and then also bringing on investors. And I can speak from personal experience, particularly with bringing on investors, that unless a lot of this stuff is documented, then it's going to be very hard to have the investors come in with confidence, not having an exact system that you follow. Is that a fair assessment? That's only my experience. You can probably comment on that in the wider business community.
Yeah, that's a very good example, because at the end of the day, your systems and processes and how well you document it, that's your unique value. So, as I said, we talk about sale of business, but even from phase 6, if you choose to bring on investors, and again, it's not for everyone, they're going to look at what's the real value of your business. And really the real value of your business is how you do things and how that is unique and what those systems and processes are. So if you don't have those in place, your valuation will be much lower. If you've got them in place, your valuation is going to be much higher. So, the systems and processes is all about building up those chocks, as you say, to get in place to build yourself for success in the rest of the phases of your business. Maximising your business is the same thing. It's about where are you now and how can you maximize what you've got now, and then to set yourself up for success, because that phase 6 is at the bottom of the dip. And what I would say as well on that is that maximizing doesn't mean, if you've got a team, that they're all working at 100% capacity. The general rule of thumb is about 80%. Once they're at 80%, if you want to continue to grow, then 80% as a business rule of thumb is that you should then look at bringing more people in at that point in time. Maximizing, though, isn't that you're just earning everything that you ever wanted to earn. It's about bringing them up to a speed where the systems are working well, and where you have the confidence that you can actually bring in more people or to expand into the future. And it's not something that's set in stone. There's not a concrete, this is what maximizing the business means for you. It will mean different things for different people depending on where they're at in their goals and in their business journey.
Yeah, you can quickly fall into that system of doing things where you don't look for another employee, as an example, until you're flat stick, busy, running around. But then you sort of realize, again, from my experience pretty quickly, that when someone comes into your business, they need to be, you need to have time to show them where the bathroom is, show them where the keys to the front door are, show them the systems, show them the processes and all that sort of stuff. And if you're throwing employees into crazy busy, it's very hard for them to know how to act, know how they're expected to act, and I suppose fall in and build on the culture that you should have set in the earlier stage, right? So I think that's a very good point, and one that, just thinking about it now, a lot of businesses probably don't get that as right as what they actually could.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's not so much lawyers involved in the maximising your business stage, but it's something that's, I think, is that crucial that I had to include it in the life cycle, because it is something that people need to, as you say, people miss, and that they need to have in place. But if you're bringing on investors, you definitely need a lawyer at that stage to document that right and to make sure the expectations are set out correctly.
And I think if you're choosing a lawyer too, through these early phases, it's probably the more basic aspects of law, right? Registering a business name and that sort of thing. But you want to be building a relationship with your lawyer through this period. So when you get to a point where you are looking to take on investors, and where some decisions and advice that you get from lawyers and accountants, and that becomes so critical in the growth and expansion of your business going forward, I guess you want to use these early phases just to get to know them and know they're the right person for the job. And am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. And you want someone who's going to give you business advice, not just the letter of the law advice. All too often it's drummed into us at law school. You just got to give the legal advice. Well, there's business advice too, as being a business lawyer. So you want someone who's going to give you that practical advice, not just what the law says. Of
course, is there certain types of businesses that do really well when they take outside investment? Because it sounds like a bit of a sexy thing, if you like, to have investors and people investing in my company and all that sort of stuff, but it's not always the best way to go. So is there a type of business that goes really well bringing in outside money, if you like, and also expertise? Outside expertise, another important thing?
I think a business that's looking for scale, not growth. So growth, the distinction there is, scale, you're looking at what you've got now and using the same model to build many, many times the business, but without increasing the cost by very much. In growth, you might bring on another employee to help grow the business, but you've got a cost that goes with that. So I think the main businesses that I see successfully bringing investors, I see them on both sides, but the ones that mainly see the success of bringing them in are ones that are looking for scale, because ones that are just looking for growth, they can probably do that organically. They probably don't need to bring in investors to grow organically. There are some situations where they might, but main ones are the businesses that are looking to scale.
So you want to make sure that you're getting, and investors probably, of course, do as well. They want an exponential return when they put their money in, right, as you want inside the business. So it makes sense. Yep. So we're starting to turn out of this downturn. We're starting to build here. And the next phase you've got listed here is expansion, franchising, and licensing. So how does that come into play?
Yeah, so this is really about once you have got everything in place properly and you've got your IP protected, you've got some employees, you've maximised your business, then look at expansion. So expansion can take a number of different forms. One, if you've got a business, you can open up in a different location. You can service a different type of customer. You can buy another business. You can franchise and you can license. Again, it's not for everyone. There are some people who are business owners who just want to run in their little business, and that's great, and earn their money every year, and that's cool. So expansion is not for everyone. If it is, though, then you need to really have everything in place that we've talked about in the first 6 phases before you look at expanding. And really, what the book goes through is what are those different options, and what do you actually have to look at when doing them. Buying another business can be a great way to expand. So I've got many clients who will buy similar businesses like accounting firms. They might go and buy a bunch of accounting firms from different areas to build their client base, or financial planning firms. Although after the Royal Commission, that doesn't happen as much as it used to. But accountants still happening quite a bit. If you're looking at franchising the business, that's a whole different other skill set that has to come involved in that. And you need to have systems and procedures that are really, really tight if you're going to franchise a business. So you need to decide whether or not that's something you want to do. It's not for everyone. And really franchising, I'll just throw another thing on that. That's a separate business. If you're franchising, that really becomes a separate business, because you've got your own business and then you're franchising out your own business. So there are many different ways to be right in all this area. The book goes through those different areas and says, if you want to do this, this is what it means, and this is what you have to do, and this is the advice from the people that you should get.
So being a different type of business, so you're probably really starting to look at going to people who specialise in those sort of areas for law and accounting and the like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say on that is too, is if you've got a really good relationship with your lawyer and accountant, it could be that rather than just, I'm not going to deal with that lawyer or accountant anymore, I'm going to talk to a specialist, it may actually be better that the lawyer engages, or the accountant engages the specialist on your behalf. Because if you go to another lawyer or accountant, that you got to tell your whole story again, and they'll have a whole different, they're coming to the business with a whole different mindset. Now that can be really good if you haven't got the right lawyer or accountant. But if you've got the right lawyer or accountant, then at that phase, it can actually be better to engage another lawyer through that lawyer, as long as the costs are right, we're not doubling up on costs, to get the right advice, so that you're getting that business advice. Because often those specialist advisors are just there for, say, franchising. There's plenty of specialist lawyers out there doing franchising. They might not have the business experience on the before and after side. And so if you've got a good relationship, I'd say don't throw that out straight away. Make sure that you're talking to the lawyer about how that you can actually continue to work with them to continue that business advice going forward. And the same with an accountant.
It's sort of like the relationship with a doctor, right? You want to have probably a good working ongoing relationship with your GP, as an example, but they talk to your specialist if for whatever a certain issue that you've got, but you sort of always run through them for checking the advice, checking your results, seeing what could be coming up. And I guess if you're going down the franchising path, that extra layer in there as well, it's probably really smart, because the other thing you learn pretty quickly in business is, although you might start off with the mindset that you know quite a lot, you realise pretty quickly that you don't really know anything at all. At least that's, again, my experience and how I feel with a lot of this stuff. So having that other layer to run it through just kind of makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, and don't think of it as a cost, think of it as an investment. If you're getting the right advice, it's an investment, and you're learning, and it'll help you in the long run.
So the next phase here is estate planning, which is, exactly what does that mean? That kind of, to me, I think about end of life sort of stuff when it's put like that in a business term. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. It's about wills, putting a will in place for your assets. It's about planning out, if you've got business partners, what happens to your business if something happens to you? What happens to you if you're just a sole operator? What happens to you in that phase? It's in phase 8. It's something that could be done early on, but it's one of those things that, as I've been doing this for 16 years when we're recording this, and I know people don't want to think about it. I know that, I've done it time and time again, conversations with people where, oh yeah, sure, we should do the wills, we should put our power of attorneys in place. And that doesn't happen or it takes 2 years for it to happen because people don't want to think about it. I get it. I don't want to think about it either. The reason it's here is that once you're at this phase of your business, you have something to protect. You may have a family. You'll have a family of some sort, whether or not you've got kids or a spouse or parents or whatever. You'll have a family of some sort.
Yeah. Or your own employees or advisors or whatever. Absolutely.
Exactly. So they need to be protected. And so the point of putting it at this phase is to go, okay, look, I acknowledge that people don't want to think about it. If you haven't done it by this stage, do it now. You don't have a choice. You have to do it now because you've got to protect your estate going forward. You cannot let it wander anymore. So that's the reason it's at this stage. And it's not a pleasant thing to think about. I get it, but you need to do it.
And does any general lawyer can handle that, or do you need to again go to someone who's specialised in that sort of area? How does that normally work?
Well, again, it depends on the complexity of what you've got. If it's not a massively complex estate, most general lawyers can do it. If you've got, so for instance, we had a client years ago that came to us through a financial planner, and he had, we sat down with him, and he had $300 million worth of property.
That's just above the average amount, isn't it? That's right.
But we were able to do that. That's our business background, and our advice background was able to give him advice on that. But your average lawyer probably doesn't have the knowledge and the complexities around that. He had 3 young children, and he wanted to protect the business going forward, and so he had to put certain structures in place that actually helped that. So for most of us, it's probably your average lawyer can do it. If you've got a bit more of a complex situation, then go and see a lawyer who has, in that situation, he had this $300 million business that had properties all over the place. And we had to put in business advice to protect the business so that if something happened to him, one of the 3 children couldn't just sell it up straight away. And that's very different. Yeah, that's combining estate planning with business advice. So, average lawyer maybe, but if your situation is unique, and you should go and get some proper advice.
Then we move on to investing in property, which is the next phase. So I guess you just said good reason to get your estate planning done before you move into this phase, but it can be done around the same mark. So why does investing in property come now? Is that when, I'm just thinking out aloud here, I'm assuming that when businesses have been around for a couple of years, they've probably accumulated some sort of assets, maybe even if it's not property, but probably have some good cash reserves. Maybe that's the time where you start investing in a premises of your own. You might move out of that leasing environment. You might be looking to expand and buy another place or whatever. Am I fitting this in about the right place in terms of a business?
Yeah, and it's like estate planning. It's something that you could do earlier. What I've seen, though, is the successful business owners, the ones who've really built good, scalable businesses and made real value, is they've waited a little while to invest in property. And then once they're earning good income and making nice profits out of the business, then they go and do it. As I say, it could be something that you do early on, but if you're not doing it by now, once again, it can be part of the estate planning piece, that you should be looking at investing in property as a separate business. We talk about it with our clients as a second business. It's a second business of how are you taking the profits that you're making from your business and then building yourself some assets to future-proof yourself going forward. So, that's why it's in at phase 9. And it's a very important phase. It could equally be called investing in shares. It could be called just investing generally. The reason it's not is because lawyers don't get involved in share investments and all those things. We do get involved in investing in property. So that's why it's deliberately talking about property as an investment. I also personally take the view that property is a really good investment. Long term, it's had the good return over many years. And whilst I can't give financial advice, I always think it's a good investment.
And practically, that's when you're trying to set up like a passive source of income, right? Like that secondary, you're sort of moving out of that active into that passive sort of spot. So you're trying to get shares, property, whatever you do, as you said, whatever the advice you get. Obviously, you want to get that and follow it, but that's where you're trying to set up that second part of your income, if you like.
Yep.
Then we move on to litigation and dispute resolution.
Yep.
What does that involve? Sounds could be a bit of a problem, I should say.
Yeah, and it is. And I think it's something that, again, we put it in there at this phase because it's phase 10, and it's acknowledging that this comes up in business. No matter how well you run your business, you will have people that might try and sue you. You might have people who don't pay you. And it's about acknowledging that does come up in business and having some procedures and understanding around that. So the phase 10 in the book is explaining what happens in litigation. As I said, we do a lot of litigation and in the law firm, and it's something that comes up all the time, is people not understanding what that actually means and where they need to go. Unfortunately, too, if you've got a successful business, it comes up. People do, in Australia, we have the tall poppy syndrome. People do come after business owners when they are successful. It doesn't happen all the time. It's about acknowledging it. And the reason for having it in the book is to say, okay, look, this might happen. If it does, then you need to understand this is what you've got to do in that scenario so that you can protect yourself going forward. And get advice. Don't try and do it yourself. I can't say that strongly enough. Litigation, there's all these complicated rules in no matter where you are. I've been doing this, we kind of alluded to in Australia, the UK and the US. There's very complicated rules. You have to get advice. It's just, for me, it's something you have to do straight away.
And we're starting to see in Australia, I mean, you hear about those ridiculous sort of cases of suing in the US, or what we anyway in Australia consider to be ridiculous, when maybe you trip over, or there's a famous example of the hot coffee in the McDonald's cup. But you get the feeling that that's starting to creep into what we, I suppose, in someone as Australians, we wouldn't go down there. In the past, we wouldn't have done that. But now we're starting to more and more, and you're starting to hear about more of these cases. So I guess this is actually becoming more important moving forward, right?
It is. And I'll just go back a step and just say that I personally think there's a lack of personal responsibility in a lot of areas in our lives. What I would say, though, is and that leads to a lot of suing for ridiculous things like the coffee. The corollary to that, though, and what we learn in law school is that there's a public policy reason for actually helping people. So a lot of the times, people who get into these situations, I don't know whether it's actually true, but you hear that Winnebago had to put a disclaimer in their manual to say that you had to be behind the wheel at all times when the car's driving.
Yeah, that's the other one I've heard of before. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There
are some discussions that those stories aren't actually true. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't actually say whether or not that's true or not.
Of course, yeah.
What I would say, though, is that the law is there not only to protect people and protect their livelihoods and protect what they've built, but it's also there to protect people from themselves and to protect society in general from having an undue burden. And especially in the States where they have their own healthcare problems,
yes,
there's a lot of those people get compensated because there's no one else out there to help them. There's nothing else out there that they can actually get help with, and they would literally, the alternative would be that they're sitting in the gutter. And so there is a public policy argument. I don't necessarily agree that everyone should get the money, but also I don't want to see people being stuck in a gutter because they've been injured and they can't actually help themselves. So there's a balancing act that the law has to play there. I don't think we've got it right. I just, it's something that I do feel very passionately that we shouldn't be, just giving money out for ridiculous things. But by the same token, I do get the fact that we have to help people. We can't just have people living on the streets if they can't pay for themselves. So there is that litigation culture that's coming over here, rightly or wrongly. And I think we just need to look at it from both sides and see which one actually will solve the problem going forward.
I agree with what you're saying there too, by the way. And are you seeing that, have I got that right, like you're actually seeing more litigation cases, you're dealing with more now?
So we don't. My business, my law firm that I own and that I'm involved in, we don't handle that type of law. We handle.
My apology. Okay.
No, that's right. We handle business on business, but that's more a personal injury sphere. That has been building for a long time. Anyone who's seen the growth of Shine Lawyers, the publicly listed firm, there's other ones as well. Slater and Gordon, publicly listed firm. They've grown exponentially because those cases are becoming more and more prevalent. There's plenty of other examples, but they're two public listed ones, so I can definitely talk about them.
Yes.
And they've grown because those number of cases are expanding. So that does happen, and that is increasing. And for that reason, we go all the way back to phase 2 startup. That's why you have your insurance in place. Make sure that you've got your insurance and you understand it. And that will protect you going forward. Litigation in this sense is more about the B2B, so business to business suing, or B2C suing a customer for they haven't paid their bill, or suing another business owner who hasn't done the right thing. That's more what litigation this phase is talking about. But though being sued by someone who slips and falls, or someone who doesn't they haven't written caution hot coffee, even though it's a coffee.
Yeah.
That's there. So it is a complicated area of the law, and it's one that we haven't got right, but it's one that there is a balance to be had.
And if you get all the way through to this phase, you've probably started to build something fairly substantial, because this is a mature type of business that's dealing with these things, right? So again, this is really important to get, as you're rightly saying, in place, because the next phase, the sale of whole or part of a business or listing on a stock exchange, so selling it privately or listing, that's not really going to happen to a substantial sized business unless all that litigation stuff is in place. I wouldn't have thought either, right? So
that's right.
It's an essential step before you get there.
Yeah, I think we all have to acknowledge as business owners is that at some point we're going to exit our business. It could be by choice. It could be something that's completely out of our control. So we will exit our business. And if there's one thing that I hope that the listeners take away from this is this, that you will exit your business at some point. So therefore, you better do something to protect yourself going forward. And you better do something to protect your business, because the value of what you will get when you exit that business, whether you sell it or you hand it off to your children or something or anything like that, whatever you do with it, will be determined by what you've put in place in the business. And that's what the previous 10 phases are about. So, really understand that you've got to exit at some point. And this is all about setting that up so that if that happens for reasons that you can't control, that you actually do it correctly. And the other thing I'd say on that too is, a lot of business owners come to us and say, I want to sell my business. And I'm like, great, when did you make that decision? Last night over a couple of scotches and a glass of wine. And I'm like, okay, well, did you know that generally it takes 2 years to put all this stuff in place?
Oh, wow. 2 years
properly.
to get ready to sell.
That's right.
Okay.
2 years. And so, and that's not just me saying that. That's, business brokers say the same thing. To get it to a point where it's actually ready to sell generally takes 2 years to put all this stuff in place, because also if you haven't been managing your business properly, and we haven't even talked about financials, that's a whole other podcast that we could do. But if you haven't been managing all that stuff and your financials correctly, it generally takes 2 years to do it properly, because any person who's going to buy your business for any sort of value is going to want to look at what the business has been doing for the last couple of years and what they've got in place for a couple of years. So that's a whole other rabbit warren we could go down. But but what I would say on that is, just in business in general, getting all of this stuff in place is at least a couple of year exercise to do properly.
Before you move on to the next phase of actually retiring, right? So this is, and again, I suppose there's no right or wrong way of doing any of this, right? It's all circumstantial and depends on you and probably family situations and what you want to do moving forward and all that sort of stuff. But and there's probably a number of different ways to retire, right? Whether you step back into a part-time role, or you sell the lot and walk out the door, or whatever, right? So moving on to this next phase, is there anything you really need to consider around that, maybe particularly back earlier in the process?
And that comes down to your estate planning and your investing in property. So if you do actually want to retire, and in 2019, where the word retirement is getting a little bit of an ugly reputation, because what does retirement actually mean? Do we actually ever retire? My uncle recently retired, sold his business, and is back out working again. Yeah. And I see that happen all the time. So if you really, to retire properly, if you actually wanted to retire and just travel for the rest of your life, then you better have your estate planning done in place, and you better have some sort of investment strategy so that you're earning passive income, and that you're getting advice from a financial planner and an accountant to do that properly. More often than not, the people that I deal with, Matt, they don't go straight to retirement. They sell their business and they go back to conception and start another business, or they've already started another business and they go there. So there's many ways to be right. That's often what happens. And retirement can also entail, often people will, we talked about investing in property. You might buy the land from where the business operates, and you might hold on to that land, and the business pays you rent while someone else owns the business. So there's many ways to be right with retirement, but it's something that you've got to think about what you want earlier, especially in phases 8, 9, to make sure that you can do what you want when you get to phase 12. Sorry. And
a lot of the reason for running a business, I would think, from an owner's perspective, in a lot of ways, is to actually build that second set of income to be sustainable in retirement, right? That would be a good way to go into retirement, where that income, not only can you live at the secondary level, but you also want that to grow as well. So the best quote that I've heard in regards to retirement and how you should retire is that retirement's okay as long as it doesn't get in your way of your work. Because one of the things about being a business owner is that everything it takes to be a business owner is not often the same characteristics that go really well to doing nothing and sort of hanging around the house and maybe traveling or whatever. We as business owners, we tend to be a bit more need to do something to feel alive, whatever, right? So that complete switch over, I think that would actually be, I haven't looked at this is my opinion, but I think that's probably more rare than common, the sell it all and sail off into the sunset, way of doing things. Yeah. Few people are actually set up in a way that they can actually do that, to be honest. And that's the reality of life. And what I would say on that too is, don't rely on the government to provide you money. I mean, in Australia where we are, there's an old age pension. It's not a lot of money. If you want the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to, or you intend to become accustomed to, you've got to have those chocks in place. And if you don't, well, then you may have to go back to work. And as you say, I don't ever see myself retiring. You look at Warren Buffett; he's in his 90s. Yes, he's not retiring anytime soon, and he's going really strong. And I see that as an inspiration to me. That I have lofty goals. I want to make legal advice accessible for all SMEs around the world. That's my goal. That's a lifetime goal. That's not a lifelong goal, I should say. And I don't see myself retiring anytime. Good to hear, because the last phase is insolvency or winding up, right? So this is, well, if you retire and the business doesn't get passed on, I'm assuming this ties back to, in some ways, either you go broke, or it ties back to your estate planning, right? When the business actually comes to an end. Yes, that's right. And so this can be good or bad. So you could sell your business, retire, and then you wind down your assets and sail off into the sunset. You could sell your business, not retire, but you still need to wind down your assets and start again.
Or if you don't go through the phases all properly, you could get sued and you could end up in insolvency winding up, or you could not have enough money to pay your debts and you could end up in insolvency and winding up sooner rather than later. In other podcasts, other hosts have nicknamed it death.
I was trying to think of a nice way of not saying death. You probably come across the way I asked that question, but yeah.
I just thought I'd call it out because it is often the death of the business, and it really is at some point. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. From that comes regrowth. There's plenty of failed business owners who have started again and built great businesses second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time around. So insolvency winding up is not something that you like to get into. It's something that if you've set yourself up properly though, and you've put all the chocks in place, you can manage it the best way that you can. And that's really what we're about, putting those chocks in place to protect people going forward so that, if that did happen, then it's not as bad as it all seems.
And where does your personal desire for sharing this information come from? Because you've been working in Australia for quite a while. You touched on the UK and the US that I know that you're expanding to, and I think you've had to rejig a couple of parts in your book, if I understand it correctly, to cater for those markets. So where does that actually come from?
Well, it comes from that I set myself the big, hairy, audacious goals of making legal advice accessible for all SMEs around the world and their owners. And that's a large goal. And it's something that I certainly see in reach because I want to help out business owners. I am sick and tired of just solving the problem after it arises. And I can see that I can do that on scale. I can see, I talk to lawyers, I talk to business owners, in those 3 countries. I haven't gone any further than those 3 countries at the moment, as at the time of recording this. So I do have plans to go further, obviously. And time again, it's the same problems with lawyers. It's time and time that we're reactive. We're just there to solve problems. What people don't realize is how we can actually be proactive. And so I wrote the book to actually help people to get an understanding about what they need to put in place and who they need to speak to so they can do that. I won't be doing a book for every country. There's 200 countries in the world. 200 books would just be way too confusing for Amazon. But I have other tools and other education pieces on the back end of that that will make it so we can actually help people I want to do every country. So that's the goal I've set for myself.
And part of you doing that is also educating other lawyers. Is that right as well?
That's a huge part.
Into sort of how to think about this process and how to apply it. Have I got that roughly right?
Absolutely, and a corollary to that goal of making it accessible for all SMEs is actually to change the way people view us lawyers. We have a negative stereotype in the community, and if you want to talk about really big, hairy, audacious goals, changing the way people view lawyers is a huge one, and it's one that I do see that if we can do that, if we actually change how we interact with people. And the type of advice that we give. Stop being the person who constantly comes with problems and come with the solutions, and that will help change that perception. One step at a time, though, Matt. You can only change the world one step at a time. And if in doing this we can change that perception of lawyers and make people actually want to talk to us and want to interact with us, then that's a great thing to do as well.
How would you like the average person to think about a lawyer, ideally?
I would like them to see as someone that they could talk to, someone that they could get advice from and that they could interact with and help solve their problems.
Do you see the evolution of technology simplifying this process for you, being a part of law, taking away some of the jobs that lawyers traditionally have had to do themselves? Is that an element you've given some thought to?
It's one of the things I think about daily. I'm very excited. It's something I'm very excited about. I think that one of the problems with law, and there's a massive problem in the community of lawyer burnout. I've employed many lawyers. I've worked with many lawyers. I run masterminds for lawyers and business owners, and I deal with lawyers with the life cycle. And so often they say to me, I just want to get out. And one of the reasons for that is the mundane tasks that we have to do. And I'm really excited about AI. I think in 2019 when we're recording this, the technology is probably there, but the cost point is way too high. I think there's a lot of help that lawyers can get from artificial intelligence in the future to make their jobs better, to make the practice of law a much more enjoyable thing, and to make it something that we can actually help people with. And I think at the moment we're too busy and they're doing all the grunt work. And if we can use technology to help us to get away from that, then that's a great thing that we can do. And, I've used technology, no doubt talk about it coming up, but we have online tests and things that actually help people. And I foresee that evolving into the future to actually help lawyers to be able to help their clients better.
So we mostly do that now. You've put it together a couple of things for listeners of the podcast. So the tools that you've had, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it sounds like you've got components for business owners or others, and then you've also got components for lawyers as well, right?
Yeah, I do. And if there's any lawyers listening to this, check out what I'm about to talk about. What I've put together is more for the business owner, just being realistic to your client base, Matt.
Sure.
But if lawyers are interested in finding out how they can use this for their business, please get in contact with me, and I'll certainly help. So if the listeners and viewers want to check out businesslegallifecycle.com/trench for the Trench Talk podcast,
of course,
I've put together a bit of a page. The first part of that is copy of chapter 2 of the book, The Business Legal Lifecycle, the Australian version of it. And that's the startup phase. So that's got really the real meat, I reckon, of what you need to have in business. And even if you've been in business for 20 years, I strongly recommend that you download that and read that. And the reason for that is there's a lot of nuggets in there that even existing business owners get. I get feedback from them all the time about, now I understand why I need to do that, or, I should put that in place. If you haven't done it previously, read it. It's not that long. and it's really, I've deliberately written in plain English. And that's my gift to the viewers and listeners of this show, because I think that they can get a lot of value out of that. The second part of that is I mentioned before that I do run masterminds. I have a business mastermind and I have a lawyer's mastermind. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, there's a link to that. There's also, as a thank you for having me on the podcast, you can order a copy of my book, or you could take the test. So I have an online test. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes. It's 30 questions. And what it does is it places you in the life cycle. It says you might be in phase 5, protecting intellectual property. And it'll tell you what you need to do in that phase. It will tell you what you've missed from the previous 4 phases, and it will tell you what you need to do in the future. And so what it will give you is a roadmap of what you need to put in place for your business. And I'm really excited about this. This is something that we're expanding to the UK. We're going to the US. Lawyers are using it to help their clients. Business owners are using it. We usually charge $95 for that as a thank you for having me on here. If the listeners and viewers use the coupon code TRENCH, this is all on the webpage. It's $49.95. And I know this is a podcast, so people could be listening to this in years to come. So we'll keep that code up and coupon code up there for future listeners. But that's as a thank you for that, for coming on doing that. And finally, I've just got to contact me, my email address. If people want to get in contact with me, then they can email me directly.
And I'll make notes on the episode page to all of this stuff as well. So make it super easy to get through and do that checkup, because I'm just thinking that a lot of the conversation today, I think people are going to listen to and go, yeah. You know what? I can probably check that one little thing and it could probably be improved or whatever. So it's probably a good reminder to get from time to time, just that all these things are actually humming along as they should be, because you can always go back and improve things, right? So a question that I do, which I think is going to be very relevant to you, Jeremy, but that I ask everybody, if you could have one law changed or implemented, what would that be?
That's a great one. And it's a tough one for a lawyer. I've seen many, many laws. I'll give one specific example in Queensland, where I'm from, and that's surrounding, there's a law in Queensland that deals with builders, and it's actually relevant to your viewers and listeners. And if you've got builders who are licensed in Queensland, if something goes wrong with their business and their business goes into liquidation or they get bankrupted, if that happens once, they get an automatic 3-year ban. If it happens twice, they get a life ban, and they can never ever trade and have a building license business ever again. Okay. And that was changed by the government a few years ago, and I think it's wrong. I think that's a terrible law to have in place for an industry, because it used to be the case that you could apply to say, look, that was outside my control, and you could get an exemption to that. And that was a really good system. It worked really, really well. And then the government changed it because they were spending too much money on lawyers fighting it.
Oh, okay.
If there was one law, I know that's very specific. I know that I talk about concepts, but if there's one law I could change, it would be that one, because I think it's wrong. I mean, I've said this to the powers that be, and they don't care. So that's one law I would change. The other one that I would change would just be around, at a higher level, around disclosure of who's behind companies. So at the moment, there's a lot of, maybe not right now, but in the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about Cayman Island companies and offshore companies, and the fact that you can hide who's behind who owns companies. You can do that in Australia. You can do that in the UK. You can do that in the US. The US, the states there, like in Australia, you can list a shareholder and you don't have to list who actually owns the beneficial interest behind that. And I would change that to make that more open so that we could actually find out who was behind companies. I'm very big on knowing, I make everything publicly available for myself, and I think that we shouldn't be hiding behind companies. So that's a change that I would make. I would make it so that when you have a company register, you can always find out who the people behind those companies are.
Why is that? Is that effectively to stop people hiding, right? Why is that important? Why do you see that as important?
I see that as important. I think the hiding can be for two main reasons. One is anonymity. I get the anonymity that, say, an actress or an actor might want to have, someone who's in the public eye, and they don't want everyone knowing who's behind them. But it's the other people. It's the people who are deliberately trying to hide from their obligations. That let's say, and I've seen this happen. I obviously won't mention any names, but I've seen people set up entities to get around not paying their kids, paying child support to their ex-spouse. I think that's wrong, and I think that there's a balance that you've got to have. I get the privacy argument, but at the end of the day, if you're in the public eye and people are that interested, they're going to find out anyway. And I think that for me, it's that element of, I don't do family law. I've never done family law. I find it very difficult to deal with. But I think that the people who hide their assets, they shouldn't be allowed to. And if they run up debts with suppliers, as someone who's dealt with this a lot over the years, if you've got people who have built up debts with suppliers and you don't actually know who they are behind them, then that can actually destroy other businesses, it can destroy other families, and it can destroy other communities. And I think that's wrong. And I think we should always know who's behind a company so that we can, so that there's full disclosure and we can't hide from it. That's my personal view.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I think it's a pretty good argument too that if you do the right thing, there's next to no reason to actually hide, right? So that's a pretty common argument. You do a lot of speaking, Jeremy. Obviously, you're an author and you run groups and the like. Have you got any books or documentaries that you recommend to anyone who's interested in growing themselves or a business?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to show you a book. Actually, I was hoping you'd ask that question. This is a book that I think every business owner should read. High Output Management by Andrew S. Grove. He was the CEO of Intel, and it's one of those books. I only read it about 6 months ago, and I wish I'd read it when I started my business. The fundamentals of a business. This just goes through every single fundamental in the business. In the masterminds that I run, the very first book. So that they're all book-based masterminds, and we get people to read books, and then we talk about the books. Everyone gets a copy of this book, and when I start a new group, that's the first book that we do, and we talk through it. And where someone comes in, I give them a copy of that book, and I then we'll either have scheduled calls or I'll just bring them up and make sure they're actually reading it, because there's so much in here that I wish I knew when I started that I think it's really important that people have it.
I'm actually glad I asked that question because we didn't set that up. It seemed a bit, I've got one. Here's one we prepared earlier, but it wasn't set up.
Certainly was not set up to anyone who's watching all this.
Now, Jeremy, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up here? I want to be respectful of your time.
Thank you, and obviously the listeners and the viewers as well. What I would say is always be learning. One thing I've learned in this journey of being in business and in life generally is that we've got to learn. And if you're listening to this podcast, they say that people who listen to podcasts love reading. That's great, whether it be audio books, Kindle books, hard copy books, whatever. Always be learning, always be curious. The world is changing at a phenomenal rate. The technology changes that are coming, you're going to get whiplash if you don't stay learning, and you might get it anyway, but always be learning, always be curious, whether that's reading books, listening to podcasts, make sure that you're learning. And then the second part of that is implement. Don't implement everything because, if you listen to as many podcasts as I do, you'd never get anything done for trying to start to implement. But pick the key things that you want to do. Pick 2 or 3 things as your big rocks that you're going to implement on a regular basis, and that'll set you up for success. And
work out a system for implementing those to make them sustainable in your life, of course, as well. So your website, businesslegallifecycle.com.au. I've got through this whole thing without saying lifestyle, which I did about 3 times in a row before we started, but I understand that's common. So it's definitely businesslegallifecycle.com.au. Yep. Now, on the social platforms, have you got any favourite anywhere that people can track you down if they want to learn a little bit more about what you're doing?
I would say Facebook is the main one that I do, and also LinkedIn. So if you search for my name, Jeremy Streten, on LinkedIn, and we can also link it in the show notes if you like. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And Facebook, if you search for Business Legal Lifecycle, you'll see that I post there regularly. I try and do a Facebook Live every day with a quick tip for people, and I post interesting articles. I love to read. I post interesting articles of things that I do. So, yeah, you can check out that.
Awesome. Cheers, mate. Well, as I said, I want to let you get back to your day, and thank you for carving out just a little bit of it to have a chat with me and the wider community. Appreciate your time and advice and expertise, and for giving us all something that we certainly should think about, consider, and check up on from time to time. So thank you, Jeremy, for doing it.
Thank you for having me on, Matt.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show, and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.